You probably already know that scientists tell us that the basic building block of all physical matter is something called the atom. But did you know that the concept of the atom came from a Greek philosopher named Democritus around the year 450 AD? That was a long time ago. Well, Democritus believed that matter could be broken down and divided down into its most basic unit, which he called the atom. That word atom means indivisible. It means it's the smallest form you can get in its wholeness. Well, it wasn't until the early 1800s that an English scientist named John Dalton came along, and he discovered evidence that supported the existence of atoms. And his research and his evidence formed the basis of what we now call atomic theory. And since then, advancements in science have enabled scientists to view and study atoms in greater detail. But that's not really the point of this video. I'm here today because I want to talk to you about making disciples of Jesus Christ. And I've got a question, and it's this. What is the basic building block of making disciples? What is the essential element that is needed to make followers of Jesus Christ? Are you ready for the answer? The answer is spiritual conversations. Listen to what Romans chapter 10, verses 13 through 14 says. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. But how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they have never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? Now, this verse isn't talking specifically about spiritual conversations, but it does make one essential point, and that is that people can't come to faith in Christ without hearing the message of Jesus Christ. And that means someone has to communicate with them. Communication is essential to making disciples. And not just any communication, verbal communication is essential to making disciples. Well, that raises the question then of what are our options for communicating the message of Jesus to non-believers? Well, we could preach to them, we can teach to them, we can give gospel presentations, but that raises another question, and that is this. Are non-believers looking for these things? Are they putting themselves in a place to receive this kind of communication? Is this the kind of communication that they want to receive? And if you're like me, you're probably thinking, well, maybe for some people, but for most people, no. And so the next question then is, are these the best options for communicating with believers, with non-believers, And I would say no. Well, the next question then is, what other options do we have? And that is conversations. Spiritual conversations are the best way to communicate with people about Jesus. And the reason for that is because when you do it right, when you have a spiritual conversation the right way, and believe me, Christians are doing it the wrong way all the time, and that's why you have conversations that end in debates and arguments and people going away with their feelings hurt, feeling offended. But when you do it the right way, it creates a safe space and environment for non-believers to talk about and work through their questions, their doubts, and the barriers that are holding them back from having faith in Jesus and starting a new relationship with him. Spiritual conversations are needed to move people toward faith in Jesus Christ. And then spiritual conversations are still needed to help a new believer grow in their understanding of who Jesus is and how to have a relationship with him. When a non-believer grows toward Christ, it's usually a process, right? It's not just this instantaneous thing. Yes, when they become a believer, that's instantaneous. But usually the Bible tells us God is working in someone's life, bringing them to that point. And usually there are believers, there are Christians who are influencing a non-believer toward Christ. And that's why spiritual conversations are essential, because they help speed up the process of helping a non-believer work through their questions, their doubts, and the barriers that are holding them back from having faith in Jesus. And the same is true once they become a believer. Spiritual conversations are essential because they help a new believer understand how to obey all the teachings of Christ and what it looks like for them to have a growing relationship with Jesus. My friend Steve is the perfect example of this. More than a year ago, he was asked if he would participate as a volunteer in a program locally here where I live, and it's a recovery program for people who are struggling with addiction. And so Steve was asked if he would be a mentor for one of the men in this program. And so Steve started meeting once a week with one of these men. And it was really his only obligation was meet with him once a week, build a relationship, be an encouragement, and just have conversations, right? And so that's what he started to do. And this guy that he was meeting with was not a believer. But Steve was able to have safe, open, honest conversations with this guy as he was working through the struggles in his life and working through what he believed about God. And the awesome thing is that this gentleman did end up coming to the point where he said, yes, I believe in Jesus and I want to be a follower of Jesus. And so Steve was instrumental through spiritual conversations to lead this guy to Christ. Well, this gentleman's no longer in the recovery program. He's out of that program and he's doing well. But you know what? My friend Steve is still meeting with this guy once a week. More than a year after the fact, he meets with him once a week to have dinner and to have conversations because he wants to help this new believer grow in his relationship with Jesus. And you know, Jesus modeled this exact same thing for us. If we look at his ministry, we know that he preached and we know that he taught and we know that he presented the gospel with power and authority. That's what the Bible tells us. But his preaching, his teaching, and his gospel presentations were not the most effective form of ministry that Jesus did. Jesus' most effective form of ministry was building relationships and having spiritual conversations with people. And if you want some examples of that, I can give you 12. That's right, 12 disciples. Jesus spent 3 years investing in 12 men. He built relationships with them, and he helped them build relationships with one another. And he had ongoing spiritual conversations with them. Yes, they heard him preach, they heard him teach, they heard his gospel presentations. But what really helped these men grow and mature as followers of Jesus was that he spent time with them and he had conversations with them. He was able to help them work through their questions, work through their doubts, work through their fears. He was able to help mold and shape these men so that they would be able to carry on his ministry after he left. The success of Jesus' ministry did not depend on his preaching and his teaching and his gospel presentations to the crowds. It depended on these 12 men that Jesus spent time with and had spiritual conversations with, who would become the first church and carry on Jesus' ministry long after he left. Therefore, we can argue that when you break down Jesus' ministry to its simplest form, its purest form, we can argue that the basic building blocks of Jesus' ministry were building relationships and having spiritual conversations. Jesus didn't use evangelism techniques. He focused on having conversations with people. And you and I, as Christians, if we want to share our faith, if we want to reach people who are lost, if we want to make disciples, we will have greater success if we do what Jesus did. If we stop trying to tell people about Jesus and start talking with people about Jesus, we can have greater success. There's a huge difference between telling and talking, right? Telling is a monologue, kind of like what we're doing here right now. I'm talking, you're listening. It's a one-way conversation. But spiritual conversations are completely different. Talking is a conversation. Conversations are two-directional communication. And that's a huge difference. Jesus proved that conversations are the most effective way to reach people. Relationships provide the opportunity to have natural conversations, and natural conversations provide the opportunity to have conversations about spiritual things. If you want to be a Christian who reaches lost people and makes disciples, then do what Jesus did. Build relationships with non-believers and talk with people about spiritual things. Have conversations. Well, speaking of conversations, I would like to have one with you. I'm wondering, is what I've shared with you today practical? Is this something that you can see yourself doing? If so, I want you to tell me in the comments below. And if not, I want you to tell me in the comments below and tell me why you feel like it's not practical for you. I would love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit the like button and hit the follow button if you want to receive more of these videos from me. I'm Matthew Lawrence, and I just want to say thank you for spending a little bit of time from your day today with me. God bless you.